we go. All right, so I am Emily Hall. I work at Mote Marine. I also grew up here in Sarasota, so I'm very passionate about all this stuff that's going on and everything that we're talking about, and I think it's really great. So I'm going to talk about ocean acidification, also known as the evil twin of climate change, although they're both kind of evil, aren't they? So let me make sure I'm doing this right. Okay. So what is ocean acidification? When I talk to people, everyone's heard of climate change, but not everyone has heard about ocean acidification. And so it is, just like I said, it's the evil twin, or the other carbon dioxide problem. It is directly related to that carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere. And I'm glad Terry showed a lot of those figures and graphs, because a lot of the work I'm doing is based off of those predictions. But it has to do with the amount of CO2, but not only the amount, the rate that we're putting it into the atmosphere. So we're putting more and more, and we're putting faster and faster. And so scientists knew that some of that carbon dioxide got absorbed by our ocean, which was really great, because it took some of it out of that atmosphere and some of that warming pressure. However, again, because of that increasing rate, it's starting to shift, well, it already has been, shifting the chemistry of seawater, which is normally a very well-buffered system. It's hard to change that carbonate chemistry, the carbon chemistry in our seawater. But it is shifting, and I'm not going to get into the chemistry. You can look at some of the equations up there if you want. You can talk to me later, and I'll give you all the details. But a couple of the main points that it's doing is when more and more carbon dioxide gets absorbed by the ocean, it's starting to reduce the pH. The pH is going down, meaning it's becoming more acidic. And that causes a few things, one of them being that it can dissolve. It can dissolve anything that has a calcium carbonate shell or a calcium carbonate skeleton, and I'll show you some pictures of some of the research that we've been doing on that. The other thing that it can cause is it changes that carbonate chemistry so that marine organisms that take carbonate out of the water to build their shells and skeletons no longer have the same amount or the right type of carbon chemistry to do that. So they're not being able to build new shells, new skeletons. And that's going to be a real big problem, especially with a lot of our juvenile marine species. And so this is one of the same figures that you guys saw, very similar anyway. The IPCC has put together predicted models for the future of both warming and acidification, ocean acidification. And I like the figure up here on the top left that a colleague of mine put together back in 2009, showing, just so you can visually see the color changes of pH in our ocean. And we start with the top left being pre-industrial, going to 1995, present day, right? And then 50 years from now and 100 years from now, you can see that pH is dropping. And it doesn't drop evenly throughout our ocean. It is different in different areas, so it's not like an easy question and an easy answer. And then we have those different scenarios that we were talking about, the business as usual, if we make some changes, and then of course that magic one that if we just stay the magic one if we make all the changes and stop putting CO2, stop burning things, which is likely not going to happen. But I do show here so we talk about climate change and ocean acidification, especially with the research I'm doing, is we have to look at them together, because we're getting these warming events and consistent warming, but we're also getting that reduction in pH. And organisms and ecosystems are sensitive to these changes. And so here's one of the first examples of what ocean acidification can do. A lot of the initial studies on ocean acidification were on corals, because they're very sensitive organisms. They do show us immediate changes when things happen. You guys probably heard a lot about the bleaching, for example, that's been going on in the Great Barrier Reef. Chasing Coral, watch it. Great film. And it shows you a lot of what's happening. But this is from a colleague of mine out of Israel. They took a coral fragment, and if you want to know more about corals and the biology of corals, come find me later and I'll tell you more about it. But corals do produce their own skeleton. And a lot of our reef-building skeletons are corals, massive skeletons, big things that do, provide a lot of stuff for us. Like in the state of Florida, they provide protection against hurricanes. We just had Hurricane Irma come through the Florida Keys, and if we didn't have our coral reefs down there, those islands probably would have been wiped out completely. But what's happened is we've got coral in ambient seawater, and then we've got coral, that same fragment that was put in a reduced pH or ocean acidification water. And what happened is that skeleton dissolved right underneath it. You can even see some of the bubbles coming off of that skeleton. The animal still survived, it's still alive, but it's totally changed what its what it's going to be able to do. It's not going to be able to provide these big homes or be a big barrier to storms for us anymore. It's also going to be a lot more susceptible to fish bites. Fish are going to love that. Oh gosh, 5 minutes already. And then here's another example where we've grown coral in ambient seawater and then reduced pH water. That reduced pH water, the ocean acidification water, it didn't grow at all. This is the exact same species from the exact same colony, and one just didn't grow. So big problems for things like corals. But it's not just corals. Coccolithophores, which is a phytoplankton that we have out in our sea, provides a lot of oxygen for us, as well as the base of the food web for a lot of marine species. This is a phytoplankton that has a calcium carbonate shell on it, and we're already seeing in the field that skeleton, that shell that it has, is dissolving, and we're seeing less and less of this population. And so it's not, ocean acidification has been looked at as this big oceanic problem, and it is. But just recently, we're starting to really understand that impacts of ocean acidification might be more immediate and noticeable in our coastal zones and in our estuaries. So we're concerned about that. Our estuaries can be acidified by these atmospheric carbon dioxide fluxes, but also acidic river water, if you have rivers feeding your estuaries. In parts of the world, we have upwelling of carbon dioxide-enriched seawater, such as off the coast of California, which can add to these problems. And we're already seeing that some coastal zones show seasonally low pH, while others are showing progressively declining pH levels in recent decades. So we are already seeing this. And that additional acidification, or what we actually call biological acidification, along with ocean acidification, can create some more combined problems in our estuaries, in our coastal systems. So from freshwater input, eutrophication, which is all those extra nutrients going into our water, and hypoxia, or low levels of oxygen. They can cause, I think this is just an example, but the increased nutrient loading can cause increased algal blooms. So that's biomass that microbial communities like to eat. So they decrease oxygen levels and contribute to that hypoxia. But the microbial degradation of that organic matter also produces its own CO2, and that's that it eats the phytoplankton basically and creates more carbon dioxide. So now we're having extra problems in our estuaries. And something to think about is that it's not going to be the same in every single estuary, because our estuaries are all very different. Some are river-fed, some are spring-fed, some don't have a whole lot of river input. But in looking at these, some of my colleagues have found that there are going to be some hotspots, some ocean acidification hotspots, like Alaska, Gulf of Maine, Chesapeake Bay, the Gulf of Mexico. That's our area. And because of varying geographic, ecological, and socioeconomic positions, it's going to be interesting how we deal with this and how we approach these problems. And I keep talking about calcification as the problem, but there are, so some of our local organisms to worry about are scallops. We already have a lowering in our number of bay scallops, but this is another problem. We've done some studies at Mote looking at the effects of ocean acidification on bay scallops, and we already see that they don't grow. Some of them don't even survive in those environments. Our oysters, clams, other things. But also fish. There have been studies where we put baby fish, juvenile fish, in a tank with a predator, and so in normal water, they swim away from the predator, right? That's their normal behavior. But then we've put them in acidified water with a predator, and their biosensory capabilities get all thrown off, and they'll swim towards the predator and get eaten. So we know there's other problems just besides the calcifying stuff. And I wanted to show you just a couple of examples. This is a species of sea urchin that we have in Florida. The spines on it are serrated to protect it from predators, and in a low pH or a high CO2 environment, those serrations dissolve away, so that loses its capability. Also, if you may have also heard ocean acidification called the osteoporosis of the sea, and this is an example of what it can do. This is within the spines. The calcite production is that it actually starts to cause greater porosity, and it makes them really brittle, so they can break right off. Again, making things hard for protection against predation. And so, oh gosh, 30 seconds. Okay. So how do we manage it? Well, and Stevie will talk a little bit about some of the things that Sarasota is doing, but we have to do all of these things. We have to monitor. We have a lot of estuarine systems. We haven't been monitoring the carbonate chemistry as well as we should be, along with temperature. We have to look at possible adaptation. We have to keep doing public education programs, management responses, restoration programs, and we just have to keep doing it, and it's going to help. Also, I throw in here this slide because looking for areas of refugia or areas that will survive. Time's up, okay. Like seagrass beds, deep holes, vents, mangroves, and algal-dominated systems. Ask me questions during the thing. But again, big questions that we look at. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? Should restoration efforts be geared toward what other species are impact? How will ecosystems as a whole be affected? Can we change or slow down the process of ocean acidification, and are there other ways to protect our marine and coastal ecosystems? Ask during the questions. Sorry, thank you.